race of strategy with overtakes up and down the order in Austria, as the second race of the first triple header of this season was straightforward for Red Bull and Verstappen. As a result, Max has extended his championship lead to 19 points, so close to a full race win between him and Lewis Hamilton in second. There's a lot to talk about up and down the order, so here's my 5 things we learned from the Styrian Grand Prix. Let's have a look. My name's Andy, and this is Behind the Drive. Max Verstappen extends his championship lead. It was a remarkably quiet Grand Prix for Max Verstappen, as he never really looked to be challenged during this afternoon's race. So it's got to be a green box for the Dutch driver this weekend, as he and Red Bull have been far superior over the last 3 or 4 races, and that includes France, where Mercedes was expected to be the strongest car. The 2 title challengers disappeared off into the distance after Lando Norris held Bottas and Perez back in the early stages of the Grand Prix. And even though they were ahead, it was really Verstappen running off into the distance on his own, as he won the race by a huge margin after Hamilton went for that late pit stop to achieve the fastest lap. It's a theme of the season, and it continues to be the case as Hamilton and Verstappen are a cut above the rest this year. But I'm amazed at Verstappen's consistency in particular and his ability to deliver great results at every single Grand Prix. At all of the races that he's finished so far this year, he's been either first or second, and it's reached a point where his consistency is the reason that he's leading the World Championship by such a large margin after 8 rounds. He even had the time to do a burnout across the finish line this afternoon, and it really adds insult to injury when Mercedes are having to manage the points gap to Verstappen at each race by going for the fastest lap. The momentum of the championship is well and truly in the hands of Red Bull and Verstappen right now, and Mercedes looks so dejected behind with no ideas of how they might be able to beat them when they don't have the kind of pace of the Red Bull. Hamilton said in his post-race interview that they needed a development in either the power unit department or with their aero package to catch up with Red Bull, but Toto Wolff remains adamant that focusing on the future with their 2022 car is equally, if not more important, with that longer-term view for the team. It'll be interesting to see if Mercedes comes back with any further developments or if they'll just be looking to compete with Red Bull on strategy going into the next few races. But what's for sure is that it was Verstappen in a league of his own today. The teammate gap between Ricciardo and Norris is huge. Whilst most of the drivers that transferred teams over the winter have pretty much got up to speed by this stage in the season, Daniel Ricciardo continues to struggle in his new McLaren car. It's a strange one, as when he moved to Renault, he didn't take this long to get up to speed. And I think the main reason for this is the fact that he was beating his teammate from an early stage in the season with Renault. But this year, however, Ricciardo is well and truly struggling to get to grips with his papaya car, and when compared to his teammate, he looks completely out of it. So it's a red box for Daniel Ricciardo as a result of his gap to his teammate. Most of the transferred drivers asked for 5 races or so to get up to speed and get used to their new machinery. And since then, Sergio Perez has been completely on form in his Red Bull, even winning a race in Azerbaijan. Sebastian Vettel has been delivering in his Aston Martin, and Carlos Sainz has been up there with his teammate Charles Leclerc in his Ferrari. But Daniel Ricciardo, the driver that many thought would come in and comfortably beat Lando Norris over the course of the season, has simply not delivered on everyone's expectations. There have been races where the gap is smaller, take last time out in France for example, or back in Spain. But during the race this afternoon and this entire weekend, the gap has been huge between the 2 McLaren drivers, apart from in the FP2 session where Ricciardo came second. In qualifying, Norris took 4th place, which became 3rd on the grid after Valtteri Bottas' grid drop, and Ricciardo could only achieve 13th place on Saturday. This kind of gap at the 8th race of the season is unexpected and pretty disappointing to say the least. In the race, Norris came home 5th, the best of the rest spot, and pretty much did all he could with his car this afternoon given the pace of the Red Bulls and Mercedes ahead of him. But Ricciardo ended up all the way down in 13th, and yes, he had an issue at one stage of the race which dropped him down the order, and he could have had a good race if it wasn't for this and potentially even ending up 6th again as he did last weekend. But even considering this issue, he never really looked capable of getting his way back up the order once it was fixed, and ending up 8 places behind your teammate is not a very good look. Last season, McLaren achieved 3rd in the championship ahead of Renault and Racing Point, because of both of their drivers' consistency. They would always be there or thereabouts, whilst their rivals would have good and bad races based on the different track characteristics. This season, the McLaren team were in a close fight with Ferrari for third in the championship once again, and it's remarkably similar to last season, with the Ferrari car being much better at some circuits compared to others, and the McLaren car, in the hands of Lando Norris at least, being pretty good at every Grand Prix. The gulf between Ricciardo and Norris is reaching a point where it's starting to damage their chances against Ferrari, and it means the team can't capitalise when they have the stronger car over the course of the weekend, as they had today. As a result, in that battle, McLaren brought home 10 points from Norris, whilst Ferrari got 2 drivers into the top 10 and scored 14 points, finishing 6th and 7th, but more on them later. McLaren remain the leaders in the battle for third in the championship, but Ricciardo needs to up his game to make sure that they can stay in the fight, particularly going into next weekend as we revisit the same track. The strategy game between the number 2 drivers heats up. There was a good battle between Valtteri Bottas and Sergio Perez this afternoon as the number 2 drivers continue to battle for their teams and in order to support their teammates who are the championship contenders. And for me, it's a green box as we get to see the so-called number 2 drivers battling with each other. Perez lost out through the pits with a slow left rear tyre change from the Red Bull mechanics. But Red Bull pulled the trigger once again with a second stop for the Mexican driver, and he was hunting down Bottas towards the end of the race, bringing the gap down from over 20 seconds to just over 0.5 seconds over the finish line. It was a gutsy move for the team, and it shows that the 2 constructors that are in contention for the championship will be fighting for every single point this year, as they know that they all count when it comes to Abu Dhabi in December. It also shows that Red Bull finally have another driver who can actually compete with Valtteri Bottas, and it's adding that extra pressure to Mercedes that might tempt them into mistakes. Ferrari's race pace does the business. I've mentioned it already, but Ferrari managed to do the business this afternoon and got both of their drivers solidly into the points, and I'm going to give them a green box for their performance this afternoon. It started off in the worst of ways for Charles Leclerc as he had a clumsy lap 1, making contact with Pierre Gasly twice, which ultimately gave the French driver a puncture that put him out of the Grand Prix. Leclerc himself managed some damage to his front wing and needed to go to the pits to replace it. This dropped him right to the back of the order. He worked well to make his way back up the order, and after 2 pit stops, he had the pace at the end on fresher tyres to work his way up to 7th in the race. I'm not too sure how this result earned him driver of the day. He certainly had the most exciting race with a number of on-track overtakes, but I don't think he was the best driver out on track this afternoon. Carlos Sainz similarly had a good race, after a disappointing qualifying which saw him start in 12th position. He managed to work his way up the order with a late pit stop that saw him come out in 6th place, behind the McLaren of Lando Norris. But he came through the field well and could have had Norris in the end if he'd have cleared the Mercedes of Lewis Hamilton sooner. But together, with both of the Ferrari drivers having great pace on Sunday afternoon, it means that the Ferrari were able to outscore the McLaren team at a track where the McLaren car is probably the faster of the two. So it's a clinical performance for Ferrari, as that battle for third in the championship is looking to be such a close rivalry all year. George Russell can do it in a Williams, but not today. I'm gutted for George Russell. His weekend started off with an impressive qualifying in which he was 0.08 of a second away from making it through into Q3, and he's made it into Q2 at every Grand Prix so far this season, and finding a way of getting some unbelievable one-lap pace from his Williams car. As a result of this, I'm going to give Russell a green box for his weekend performance, but ultimately he was let down by the car this afternoon. There have been times this year, like at Imola, where Russell's been on course for points, but he's always missed out for one reason or another, and he spent the majority of the first stint in a midfield DRS train led by Fernando Alonso, and he managed to spend the majority of time within the DRS zone of that Alpine car. Meanwhile, he was able to keep the AlphaTauri car of Yuki Tsunoda behind him and maintained his position running in 8th, whilst on the medium compound tyres. He looked like he belonged in the top 10 today and was comfortably lapping at the pace of those midfield runners, in a Williams. But, as is the way with George Russell, luck was not on his side, as he ended up with a power unit issue which meant he had a long pit stop which dropped him down the order and right to the back of the grid. I'm confident that the British driver's time will come, and he will score points in his Williams car at some point in this season. But I'm gutted for him once again today, as it was not his fault that dropped him down the order and ultimately to retirement. Hopefully, with the same track next weekend, Russell can deliver a good result once again and actually pull his Williams car into the points. He absolutely deserves it after some of the performance that he's put in with that backmarker team. Honourable mentions. Honourable mentions now, and I think it would have to be a red box for the weather. It was so close to being a race with changeable conditions, and it's tough to know what the weather will be doing in the Styrian hills. But a bit of rain is exactly what this race needed to add a bit of spice. So fingers crossed for next weekend as F1 returns to the Red Bull Ring once again. What did you learn from the Styrian Grand Prix? And what did I miss? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed the video and watched this far, then be sure to leave it a like and hit the subscribe button. I've got loads more F1 related content to come for the season, so make sure you stay tuned.